What I do is I build rapport, and I do try to let them feel I'm on their side. I'm going to try to do everything I can to help you through this, but there are steps that you have to do to make sure that you're healthy and that your children are healthy. That is very successful for us when we actually get them safe for the night and then the second night. And then the services we've applied for come through. So that for us is very successful because it's extremely difficult. It seems like it should be easy, but it's not.
Welcome to this season of the Institute's Child Welfare Podcast. This season, we're exploring the complex and deeply human work that happens at the intersection of child welfare and domestic violence serving systems. In cases involving intimate partner violence, professionals across these systems each bring unique roles, responsibilities, and lived experiences to the table. Those differences can create tension, but they can also spark new understanding, deeper empathy, and more coordinated responses for families. Today, we're joined by Maria Folsom, a victim advocate with the Leon County Sheriff's Office. Maria works closely with survivors of intimate partner violence, ensuring that they have the support and resources they need during some of the most difficult times in their lives. Thank you so much for being here, Maria.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So I'd like to start off with you just telling us a little bit about your role as a victim advocate and how it connects to the larger field of child welfare.
There are victim advocates at different levels, and I am a law enforcement victim advocate. So I am on the emergency end of things, like as it's happened. My goal is to figure out the safety of the survivor I'm working with and the families that go with that survivor. So it's just an immediate response. And a lot of the times the scenes that we have sometimes get called with other agencies like DCF. And so together or as a team, trying to figure out how to best help this family that's in a situation that's been traumatic for everybody involved.
You touched on something important, I think, which is the crisis response aspect of being a victim advocate in a law enforcement context. Can you just elaborate on what some of your other victim advocate colleagues, perhaps in other contexts, might provide that's a little bit different?
As in, besides law enforcement, you mean?
Yeah, like in terms of, I think I hear what you're saying is that, this is when you're coming in, you're looking at the immediate safety and not necessarily long-term case management. Versus, I think a lot of people typically think of victim advocates associated with shelters, for example, and a more long-term relationship with survivors and their families.
Right. So yeah, our biggest resource in town is the Refuge House. And that's a group that will take in, survivors and if they have children. So it's a whole family gathering into this location. And they get to see them all the way through it and hopefully advising them of what resources they need to get because there's a time frame where they have to then leave. So they're helping them with housing, hopefully counseling and things like that. So the experience is a lot different with those kind of advocates on that one-on-one for a long period of time, whereas we're just very short term and it's a high energy level of, okay, we need this. It's an emergency. Who do we need to contact? Making phone calls. It's so complicated for the immediacy of it. And the other advocates get to actually see the development that we don't ever get to see. So it is very nice when we do have some people who do follow back up with us to say, I'm doing this now and this is happening. But we rarely get to see that very often. And so it's just a completely different experience for us as a law enforcement first responder, as opposed to those who are working day in and day out for months, even years. Even our state attorney victim advocates, they work with them long term because court cases take forever. And so they really develop a long period of time with them. And we rarely ever have that kind of experience. They have to reach out to us. And I just had somebody do that where I helped her with her case. It was a sexual assault. And when she went through the court system, she still wanted me to go because sometimes you just bond with people. So she wanted me to be there with the victim advocate at the state attorney's office, which is fine because we network and get along beautifully. But she just texted and checked in on the holidays. It just sort of happens that way. I think the bonding is a lot more powerful with what I do as opposed to that day in and day out sometimes. Because it's, they call it trauma bonding kind of thing, that exposure to what you just went through. And then there's this person, who's just there for you. Nothing else. I'm not a detective. I'm not trying to force you to do anything. What do you need right now? So it is slightly different than what other advocates in the world do.
Yeah. And it sounds like you have a good relationship with the network of other types of advocates in the community, but that also Sometimes you might be working with them. Sometimes you might be working with a survivor separately from any of those things. I think about this a lot in terms of just because somebody comes through your door doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna go through Refuge House's door or vice versa.
Right, right.
So having those networks, I think, are a real asset and something I think I would want the child welfare workforce to be aware of is sort of this continuum of services and the fact that there's multiple entry points into getting support from victim advocates, even if it's not necessarily through law enforcement or through a shelter.
Right, and our role also is to make those connections. That is a big, huge part, is our collaborations and networking, because we have to figure out what's the best way to help this particular person. I know there was a case that this woman had an injunction against her ex-husband from a different state, and she came to Tallahassee, put her kids into schools, and the father found out that they were here and came here and was trying to make contact with them. So she didn't have any contact with Refuge House or anything like that, but she made contact with our agency. And because I had contacts with the school system, I was able to reach out to the security person to say, hey, she has an injunction, because he showed up at the school saying, I'm the father. I deserve to see them. The school's like, well, you're right. You are the father. And I don't see why not. But the mother did tell him that she has an injunction. And they were reading the injunction from another state, and it didn't have the children's direct names on it. It had the mom's name, and there was a paragraph that did include children, but they didn't write their names, so they weren't sure if they should follow that. But I was able to make contact because of my connections with the schools to say, don't let them do it. Let's review it. And we got this person to read it, that person to read it, and it was finally agreed that the father did not have, it was a judge order that the included the children, even though their names weren't necessarily on it. So is those kind of connections that I was able to call right away and get the right person on the phone to make sure that the school didn't accidentally let these children go home with somebody who is potentially extremely dangerous, because ultimately a father does have rights to their children. So the schools are in a very difficult situation, but we were able to help with the context that I have to make sure that that didn't happen.
So, from your perspective, what are some of the common challenges when you have instances where domestic violence and child welfare overlap?
Well, the common theme for what I see is always going to be funding access, being able to get them to have any kind of resource. Is There's so much slashing happening with funding, and that's our number one challenge: is can we find them a shelter? Are we going to be able to find a safe place for them, because we can't always give them a hotel? That's cash assistance is needed. With the overlap between us, though, I think it's just difficult to see when a parent is going through something. So again, since we're short term, we don't generally see it, but I have seen it. For instance, there was a trafficking survivor who I get called into it because we have a trafficking unit, and the detective had been working with this particular person, and he was out for the day. And then that particular day, all these resources lined up, and it had to happen now. And so I got activated. So she'd never met me. And so I went out to help her get started on it, because I don't know if you've ever worked with trafficking victims. It's very difficult. They don't trust anybody, as I understand it, because everybody's hurt them, everybody's lied to them. They don't know who to trust. And so I had to go out there, show her my badge, have her like Google me and verify. When it came down to it, like, I had to transport her to the location so that she could be transported again. There was like 3 different agencies helping, and she was starting to back out, back out, back out. And it wasn't until somebody who had been working with her, she called them, and they said, listen, this is the only way you're going to get your children back. And so what's hard for me to see a challenge is to let them understand that it feels punitive, but it's not. And so watching that, because she just wants her children, but the lifestyle that she's in is so dangerous and so difficult. She was in such conflict. So it was really hard for me to watch her heart be broken all over again, because she was scared and she didn't want to leave and she felt like it was almost trafficking again. And that's why I had to like prove, like, I am a victim advocate. You can verify, you can call the sheriff's office and verify that I am who I am, because she was too scared to keep going, but she also wanted to be a mother again. But that was the only way she was gonna be a mother. So it was really difficult to see how painful it is when the agencies are there to help, but it feels so punitive to the survivor of the situation. So what I do is I build rapport, and I do try to let them feel I'm on their side. I'm gonna try to do everything I can to help you through this. But there are steps that you have to do to make sure that you're healthy and that your children are healthy. And so that's where it can be a challenge because a lot of times you'll see, DCF says you have to do this, 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 and that in order to have your children. And my focus is, are you safe? And I know you want your children, but let's go ahead and see what you got to do to make sure that you can follow these guidelines. And so it can be challenging because they feel like they're getting hurt just to have their children. So it's hard.
Yeah, I think that's something that we hear a lot about, and certainly something that we've talked a lot about here at the Institute over the last year in terms of figuring out what this cross section is, right, between these cases. When you have two disciplines, really, advocates who are there. You said it earlier. I'm there just for this person, just for this survivor. I'm the only person that's really just there for them and what they are telling me that they need. And it's hard when they're saying, well, this is what I need to be with my children is what I need. And that is not necessarily something that you are able to do without them working with the department if in the cases of removals and things like that. That's incredibly challenging. I wanted to go back to another piece that you mentioned around housing. This is just such a big issue in all facets of social services. Can you talk a little bit about what that process looks like? So if you have a survivor and your first call might be to Refuge House and they say, "I'm so sorry, we don't have any capacity." What are some of the options or what are some of the avenues that you've taken in the past to help support?
That is the number one most difficult part is because we don't have a budget to get a hotel for a night. If you ever hear of somebody getting a hotel from a deputy, that was out of their own pocket, not from the agency themselves. And there are a couple of other small local resources that aren't official, but when we get desperate, that we'll reach out to say, hey, what can you do to help? And then if we need to call outside the county, we'll try to do that. It's very, very it's the most frustrating part because it's so immediate and necessary, but it is very, very difficult. When the deputies call us desperate, I'm like, we don't have a budget for that. It's hard for them. They want to help. And they're like, so we just take them to the homeless shelter. I'm like, well, if it's in the middle of the night, chances are that's all there is.
Absolutely. And I'm sure it adds more complexity when there are children present and what shelters are able to accommodate in terms of that.
We do try to have them really think about, is there a family member? I know you may not have talked to them in a long time. Is there a church? Or is there like anybody you think that you'd be comfortable with just because we're that desperate for it?
Yeah. So sounds like a lot of leaning into your professional connections that you've made and then asking survivors to lean into their personal connections. So really all about those community connections. I know you said that you don't often get to follow cases all the way through just by nature of your position as a victim advocate. But when you do think of a successful outcome in these types of cases that include elements of domestic violence and child welfare involvement, what does that look like for you and the families that you serve, for the survivors that you serve?
That all the resources lined up beautifully. Like they were able to get into housing, get childcare assistance, were able to get a job and to continue to work on their feet and move forward. Unfortunately, like you said, I don't get to see them very often, but when the immediacy happens and it makes the connection, that is very successful for us when we actually get them safe for the night and then the second night. And then the services we've applied for come through. So that for us is very successful because it's extremely difficult. It seems like it should be easy, but it's not. It's very difficult. So when they go through, we're celebrating because it's not a rarity, but it's not as smooth as you think it would be. We have to jump through a lot of hoops. We have to get a lot of approvals. We have to, overcome the lot of no's that we get. And so when we're getting yeses, it's fabulous.
That's amazing. So we talked about this a little bit, but collaboration community partnerships is key to this work. So, who are your primary partners in the community? You mentioned Refuge House, which is the local shelter here in the Big Bend area of Florida. Who are those partners by role, perhaps? And then what makes your partnerships either effective or challenging?
I do like to say our detectives are actually in that mindset. For what we do, we get to listen in when they are reviewing the cases, and we get to make connections with the detectives as far as since we built the rapport, we get to kind of guide them into, hey, this is what we think needs to happen. And they listen. We also have great connections with North Florida Legal Services, and they've been fantastic helping people with injunctions because that process is one of the quickest process in the court systems, but you get to represent yourself, and not everybody's familiar with how it should flow and what to say, and they'll step in to help out, especially with those extreme volatile cases. The schools have been great. I have great connections with the schools. We do send the school system a list of every report that has a child in it. They don't have their information, but they know that they've been on a report. They don't know what the report is necessarily. They just know it's sort of like handle with care is what it's called. So when we're working with the cases, we know exactly what's happening. And once I get permission from the survivor to say, can I reach out to the school to see what additional services we can get your child? Then I'll call the school and say, hey, I got permission. Please help them. This is the situation. So they've been fantastic and they've been quick.
I appreciate that, and it's a good list, and I'm thinking about how this connects with our child welfare workforce. So, knowing that advocates have a really high standard, right, or expectation even, I would say, for confidentiality. You kinda use that example of if a school calls you, it's the language that we used to always say when in my very, very short tenure in the advocacy world was, we cannot confirm or deny, right, that we're working with this person. But you could, as you said, perhaps go to the survivor that you're working with and say, "Hey,
Mhm.
wanted to let you know that this person reached out and said that they are your case manager with such and such. Are you willing to allow me to speak with them?" And they can then give you that
Yeah.
permission or not. But that is one avenue that case managers might be able to understand, I think, how they might be able to tap into some of these beautiful community connections that you have that they might not. And I think part of it is really having these child welfare workers understand that by you saying, I cannot confirm or deny that I'm working with this person, I will follow up if I am able to do so, or something to that effect, right? I think having workers understand that that is a professional standard that you're holding yourself to and an expectation, and not a personal,
I don't want
I don't wanna talk to you or I don't wanna help. And I think kind of reframing it for our workers so that they understand that you're doing your due diligence and doing right by that survivor by saying, "I can't talk to you without somebody's permission." And yet, with their permission, that might be a new avenue for collaboration. So, something to think about for child welfare workers who might be looking to make better connections in the community with advocates in different contexts. Just knowing that you might feel like you're hitting a wall at some
yeah.
point, but
Reach out. Give us a
yeah,
promise.
give it a
We'll
try.
help.
So, how do you think that your unique perspective as a victim advocate influences the way that you approach collaborations?
Well, I think because we're trauma informed and we are looking for the safety component, we may be seeing things slightly different than what other people are thinking about. In particular, especially in-house, it really comes in handy when we're discussing the case with the detectives in particular. They may not be seeing it in the way that we're seeing it, and that's actually my favorite part about the job is in it's called Violent Crimes Unit. There's desk all along the room, and then there's a table in the center, and we'll come in and we'll sit at the center table. And while they're having the discussion, they let us sit in and communicate with them. And there's been a couple times where we've, like, actually said, hey, you haven't thought about this perspective. So having us there at the table, I think is pretty essential because we do see things a little differently than other people. So whether it's in-house like that or talking with legal services from what we understand and what they're trying to do, again, with the schools, we're just having just a slight different perspective, mainly because we've built the rapport with that actual person. We know exactly what they said they want, what they need, what would be best, and we get to advocate for them to whoever we think we can help them with. And so we're coming from that person's place of heart of what's going to help them most because of that rapport.
Absolutely. And if you could share one takeaway for professionals in other roles, so whether it's law enforcement, child welfare case managers, attorneys, about working with victim advocates, what would kind of be your one takeaway you would want folks to know about working with your role?
Have us at the table. Don't forget that we're there. We see things, like I was saying before, very differently. We can be beneficial in thoughts and ideas to help somebody on their healing journey because we are working with them on the most intensive time of their life. We can bring insight that you may not have thought of. So, yes, definitely invite us to the table and let us be a part of the discussions, part of the teams, and we will definitely bring a lot to the table.
And looking ahead, what changes or innovations would you like to see in how systems support survivors and their children?
Well, data sharing is probably important. Communication, easy communication with one another is pretty vital. And for us personally, easy access to cash assistance. If we can come up with some way to work together as a team so that since we're dealing with like the emergency level of things, if DCF is working on scene and we're helping and we can use our connections, but we don't have the funds. So I wish that we had something to where we could easily use cash assistance to get the immediacy of the safety of for the person and the family. And then, because DCF is going to be there for a long period of time working on things on the long run, they can continue figuring things out. But that emergency level cash assistance is just not really there. I wish we had something like that. And then being able to have data sharing that's a little bit easier. I mean, I can make a phone call. Oh, I have to try to find who's in charge, and that can be a little difficult. And then getting to them can be a little difficult. But once we get in contact, it's always been fine, but it's finding that person can sometimes be very difficult.
Absolutely. So definitely thinking through some concrete resources for these survivors that are coming to you to help address those immediate food, clothing, shelter needs
Yeah.
so that we can better set them up for success for what will likely be a longer journey.
Yeah, it's paying for rent was a recent one. Like she worked very hard. She called every place that I gave her. There was nothing. I'm like, oh, it's so hard. And she was doing what's the driving service to deliver because she had a 6-month-old. The other two were in school. And so I was trying really, really hard to get her some sort of we were just hitting walls left and right. And it didn't help that she had a history. I don't know if that denied her some services in some places, but it was frustrating to see how bad she was struggling. And the breadwinner was arrested for abusing her. So you could see why a lot of these cases, why they stay, because the struggle is real, dangerous, painful, and you just have to weigh it out. So if there was assistance readily available just to get her on her feet, childcare would have been great. And she was just running into walls left and right. So that's what I wish would be fixed is that immediate access so that they can just stand up slightly, then move forward because it's so difficult.
Maria, thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. Your work is essential to supporting families and building safer communities. For listeners, check out the episode notes for resources and ways to learn more. Thank you again.
Thank you.
If you're interested in learning more about this episode, please visit our website at ficw.fsu.edu. Thanks to Izzy Krang, Brantley Jones, and Dave Heller for their help in putting together this episode. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. I'm Dr. Lisa Magruder for the Florida Institute for Child Welfare.